What if Sleeping Beauty had been cursed with a floating sickness instead of a sleeping one? Well, I suppose she'd be called Floating Beauty. Scottish author George MacDonald called her the Light Princess in his 1864 fairy tale of the same name.
Fucked up fairy tales with Liz.
Ding! I only recently learned of Mr. MacDonald's work, although the BBC has coined him the father of modern fantasy writing. During his life, MacDonald mentored Lewis Carroll, and both Tolkien and Madeleine L'Engle have noted his influence on their work. Today I'm presenting The Light Princess thanks to follower Sean, who is sort of the producer of this fairy tale video, thanks to his generous request via the Cameo app. Let's meet the floating princess, shall we? Once upon a time, there were a king and queen who were having a difficult time conceiving. Difficulty conceiving must be one of the most oft-repeated themes in fairy tales. It's interesting that we spend so much time in them working out that anxiety. Though if I were to guess the cause of this particular couple's difficulties with conceiving, I would guess it was because the queen was loath to bed the king, because he's kind of a dickhead. All the other queens I know have children. Some of them have a dozen kids. But my wife, no, she gives me 0 children, not even a daughter, the most basic child there is. You've got nothing to say to that? I'm sorry, I was just imagining sewing your mouth shut. As if his personality weren't poor enough, when his wife finally was able to give him a daughter, the king forgot to do the one fucking thing he was supposed to do for the child's christening. Yes, friends, he was responsible for the invitations, and he forgot to invite the #1 person you don't want to forget. His cranky sister Mackenwa, who was a witch, and 2, already salty because their father forgot to put her in the will. So naturally, she crashed the party and cursed the baby princess.
Light of spirit, by my charms. Light of body, every part. Never weary human arms. Only crush thy parents' heart.
Essentially, she cursed the princess to weightlessness. The moment the kid was cursed, she was impossible to keep grounded without a tether. You could dress her in the heaviest clothing, but if she was wearing it, it was weightless too. She could hold on to things, and you could tie her down. But if she got loose, her parents and the staff had to chase her around with tongs to catch her. I wonder how this happened. Your sister cursed our child. My sister must have cursed the child. That's what I just said, you twit! Now go tell the servants to stop playing monkey in the middle with your baby! Astute watchers will note that the curse was not just about the princess's mass, either. She was also cursed with an excessive lightness of spirit. This was particularly apparent as the princess grew older, and her parents could no longer use her age as an excuse for her wild and occasionally cruel amounts of insouciance. Whee! Darling, wouldn't you like to come down now so we can teach you to walk like other young ladies your age? Why would I want to do that? Oh, darling, I am just so worried about this strange affliction. What are those weird drops of water coming out of your eyes? How are you even doing that? It's called crying, and I do it because I am sad and worried. Being sad and worried is pointless. Stop making fun of your mother right this second. Okay, Dad, I'll make fun of you. Is that a mustache on your face, or did you try to snort a caterpillar? Husband, we must do something about this. I don't know, is it really much of a curse to be light as a feather? Perhaps not, but it is a terrible thing to be so light-headed. But it is a good thing to be light-handed. But a terrible thing to be light-fingered. But it's a good thing to be light-footed. And it's a bad thing to be, and of course it's vital to be lightweight, if you know what I mean. Yes, I get it. And the princess is quite light in her weight, you know? Yes, I know. No fatties here. I hate you so much. The king and the queen brought in some philosophers from China. And their names are, well, they're about as respectful as you can imagine a white dude in the 19th century was in naming two Chinese gentlemen. Blessedly, that is the only way that MacDonald is insensitive to these characters, who are otherwise written respectfully and sometimes charmingly. One of the philosophers was more of a spiritual man. He believed that the princess's soul was caught in the celestial world while her body was on Earth. He suggested she go through a rigorous study of all earthly things. The second philosopher was more of a material man, and he believed that the princess's problem was medical. He said that the princess's circulation system was all out of whack. So he proposed they drain her of all her blood and then put it all back in, which thankfully no one tried. Soon the philosophers would get closer to the truth. You see, while the princess loved floating about, what she loved even more was swimming. There was a beautiful lake near the castle that she just adored bathing in. While swimming, she continued to feel her usual weightless self, which she enjoyed, but she also had much more control over it. In fact, swimming was the only time that the princess regretted her weightlessness, for there was a cliffside by the lake that she just would have loved to dive from or cannonball from into the water. Being in the water had a similar effect on the princess's personality. She was much more serene and down to earth. She even took things seriously once in a while. Plus, the water was the one place that she could get some alone time without a guard or a leash, since the royal family could rest knowing she wasn't about to float off into the great unknown. Observing this, the philosophers proposed that if the water could keep the princess so well grounded, imagine how well the ground could work. They suggested they bury the princess alive for 3 years. Thankfully, no one went through with that proposal either. So the philosophers circled back to the water itself. If water as an outside source could keep the princess grounded, perhaps water as an inside source could as well. Insert full bladder joke here. The philosophers hypothesized that if the princess could be brought to cry, perhaps this would break her floating curse. Thus began a campaign of sad stories for the princess. Tonight, the royal players will put on Romeo and Juliet.
Death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon thy beauty.
She's alive, you idiot! Look at this fucking guy! This is one of my favorite movies, Steel Magnolias. I can jog all the way to Texas and back, but my daughter can't. She never could. Her hair does look like a brown football helmet.
Old Dan must have known he was dying. Just before he drew one last sigh and a feeble thump of his tail, his friendly gray eyes closed forever.
This is like the 5th dead dog book you've read me this week.
And yet you stand there like stone.
None of them worked. And then the king resorted to hitting the princess to try to get her to cry, which was certainly a choice that was made in the crafting of this story. And apparently that just made her scream laugh. And the only upside of that situation is the description of the king looking deep into his daughter's eyes to see if a single tear was there. And instead, all he was met with was a terrifying smile, which I hope haunted his dreams. Luckily, the princess was about to meet the one guy who could keep her feet on the ground. That's right, folks, it's a boyfriend. The princess was enjoying her time pruning up in the lake when a traveling prince discovered her there. He had gotten lost from his retinue, and he didn't mind because it gave him a little break from this constant courting he was having to do to find a wife. And MacDonald has this lovely little line in this part where he says he wishes that the princesses of his day could get the time to meander around in the woods for a while before they were forced to marry. When the young man saw the princess swimming in the lake, he thought she was drowning due to her rather chaotic-sounding laughter. So he dove in and pulled her up to the shore, only to see her instantly float up into the air once she was out of the lake. He followed her up the side of that cliff as she rose, until she was able to grasp some tree branches and pull herself back down to him. Interestingly, this is the very first moment in the story that the princess expresses true anger. "You naughty, naughty boy! What business of yours is it to pull me down out of the water and throw me to the bottom of the air?" I am so sorry. Here, take my arm and let me set things right. Put me back in the water right now. However am I to get the famous floating princess back in the lake? You got me out of it, so you have to figure out how to put me back in. The prince saw an opportunity here, and he pulled the princess into a tight embrace and dove into the water with her. The princess loved it. How did you enjoy your free fall? You call that falling? Lord, it felt to me like flying up. I had a sense of elevation myself. Okay, buddy, watch yourself. Oh my God, I did not mean it like that. Rather, I meant I loved falling in with you. In fact, I think I'm falling for you. You know, I'm not really a pun girl. Thus began a sort of friendship, or perhaps a sort of courting between the two. They met up at the lake frequently to swim together, and the prince observed how, when in the water, the princess was much more open-hearted and down-to-earth. As soon as she ascended into the air, there was much more of a cold chaos about her, including her feelings toward the prince. He wondered if they could only be a successful couple if their house was fully submerged. One day, as the princess pulled herself into the lake, she noticed that there seemed to be more shore than there had before. And the next day, the situation got worse. The lake was definitely drying up. The princess freaked out. She didn't cry, but she did loudly express her concern, and her observations were correct. The royal family hastened to discover the source of this drain. Turns out it was the king's witchy sister, Mackinaw, who had cursed the lake to dry up. She learned how happy the princess was when she was swimming, and her old grudge flared up. The witch conjured a big snake, which she had a rather personal exchange with, giving it a little kiss and twining it around her body. I mean, get it, girl, I guess. She brought the snake to a cavern below the lake, which was connected to her cellar through a series of passages. In the cavern, she suctioned the snake to the ceiling and willed it to suck the lake dry, so to speak. And this created a drain in the lake. But yoinking that source of water did not satisfy Mackinaw. So the witch used her powers to dry up every single stream and to curse the land to drought. It was so dry that babies couldn't even cry tears. It became clear that the kingdom with no water was doomed, and the royal family offered a reward to whoever could figure out the cause of the drought. In the meantime, the loss of the lake meant the loss of the prince and princess's rendezvous. Instead of being a normal person and asking the royal family if he could court the princess, the prince disguised himself as a peasant and applied for the position of shoe shiner to the princess. He saw this as a way to get closer to her, but he didn't realize that a woman whose feet don't touch the ground rarely needs their shoes shined. So she basically forgot he existed. While the prince sat pining with polish in his hand, some children made an interesting discovery. A group of them was exploring the crater where the dried-out lake was, and one of them discovered a plaque. Death alone from death can save. Love is death, and so is brave. Love can fill the deepest grave. Love loves on beneath the wave. What the fuck does that mean? It says something on the back? Oh. If the lake should disappear, the only way to refill it is if a guy volunteers to stop up the hole himself and drown during the process. Otherwise, look forward to your parched death. Why didn't it just say that to begin with? I don't know. This discovery was shared widely, but unfortunately no one seemed willing to pony up their life in exchange for the good of the kingdom. But when the prince learned of this, he believed he was the perfect candidate. If there was no lake, he had no life with the princess, which to him didn't seem worth living, once again reminding us of the benefits of universal health care and therapy. And he figured if he gave his life for the lake, then the princess would be happy even if they couldn't be together. So he presented himself to the king. And as he had with the king's daughter, he was a little too cute with his choice of words. Your Majesty, I'm here to put a cork in it. Excuse me? I've come to plug the pain in your ass. Get the fuck out. I mean, I've come to offer myself as the man who will plug up the lake. I'm here to save the kingdom. Why didn't you just say that? Yes, thank you. Let's get you out in that lake. I have one condition. Of course you do. Hey, I'm sacrificing my life here. I think I get to ask for something in return. That's fair. What do you want? And don't go phrasing it all weird. I want the princess to keep me company while I die. Sure, that's fine with me. Also, I want her to hand feed me. And there it is. She should also stare directly at me until the water reaches my eyeballs. Well, this has been a weird conversation. Let's go stick you in a hole. The princess was set up in a boat in the middle of the dry lake. The prince stuck his legs down the drain hole and then plugged up the rest of it with whatever parts he could. It was very awkward. But slowly the lake began to fill up. The princess was much more excited about this than she was about her companion, whom she regarded rather coolly, though she did oblige him with his requests to be fed here and there. He sang to her a bit to pass the time, but soon he tired of that, facing his oncoming fate. At some point the lake filled enough that the boat began to float, and the princess cried out in glee, "We should go for a swim! I have to stay in this hole until I drown." "Oh, right. I forgot." "Easy for you to say." As day turned to evening, the water reached the prince's chest, and then his neck. The princess was thrilled to have her lake back, but she was getting anxious as she saw the lake engulfing the prince. He asked for a goodbye kiss, which she granted, and he proclaimed he would die happy. And that's where it seemed to get real for her. She watched in horror as the prince became fully submerged. When bubbles surfaced, she screamed and she dove in to drag the prince out of the water. She swam him to shore, but he was quite out of it. The princess's old nurse, who was a bit of a wise woman, began to attend to the prince. She worked on him all night long, and it wasn't looking good. But at last, as the sun broke through the trees, the prince gasped, spit up some water, and was revived.
"You're alive! Oh, thank goodness!"
Yes, the princess cried for the first time in her life in buckets. And as her heart opened up, so did the skies. It began pouring as the sun shone through, so there was a glorious rainbow. And the princess finally dragged herself out of the water. But once grounded, she remained there. She waved about, utterly confused.
"What the fuck is happening to me?"
"My darling, you found your gravity."
"This is what everyone feels like all of the time? I hate gravity! Take it back!"
"But darling, look, the lake is full again. And I assure you, swimming is quite like floating. If you ever want to feel weightless, just jump in."
"Oh, I'm so happy about the lake, but also I can't stop crying."
The lake continued to fill. In fact, the water was so great that the ground beneath the lake gave way to the cavern below. The passages that led to the witch sister's cellar were flooded. The foundation of her home was destroyed, and its walls crumbled, burying her alive within the house. The princess learned to walk at the ripe old age of however old she was, with the help of her prince. They enjoyed many swims together, and they had many children, all of whom which kept their feet firmly on the ground. The end. This was quite a charming little story, and I definitely recommend it, especially if you like Victorian fairy tales with their flowery language and strange little plots. Thanks for the request, Sean. If you would like to make a request of your own, well, you can request something anytime, but requests that are made by a Cameo or Patreon do get bumped up in the pipeline. Turns out I can be bought. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you for the next fucked up fairy tale.